Chickasaw, thank you to the Museum of Native American History, and congratulations on your 5th annual Native American Cultural Celebration. It is an honor to be part of this great event which celebrates the diversity of tribal cultures and indigenous peoples. We are especially grateful to have the opportunity to honor and recognize Chickasaw citizen, hero, and trailblazer, Commander John Harrington. Commander Harrington was the very first of all first Americans to fly into space in November of 2002 aboard the Space Shuttle Endeavour. There, he served as the flight engineer during the mission to the International Space Station, where he logged more than 330 hours in space, 20 hours of which were spent performing spacewalks. He honored his heritage by carrying the Chickasaw Nation flag on his historic trip. Commander Harrington is also a distinguished naval graduate from Aviation Officer Candidate School in Pensacola, Florida. During his naval career, he received several distinctions for his outstanding service to our country. We're also especially grateful for Commander Harrington's achievements beyond his naval and astronaut career. He has become an advocate for the education of our youth, encouraging them to pursue and reach for their own dreams. He has dedicated his life to positively impacting the lives of countless young First Americans. Today, we recognize Commander Harrington for his dedication and advocacy for First American youth and cultures. On behalf of the Museum of Native American History and the Chickasaw Nation, we present this special Pendleton Veterans Blanket to Commander John Harrington in recognition for his immense service to our country and impact on First American people. Thank you and enjoy the rest of your celebration.
Queridas amigas y amigos, les saludo con gusto el día de hoy y me complace participar en esta quinta celebración cultural anual de los nativos americanos, en la cual se reconocen el esfuerzo, trabajo y trayectoria de diferentes personalidades. Saludo de manera especial a la nación Chickasaw, a todos los aliados participantes y honrados en este evento. En este mes de la herencia hispana, me complace saludar y reconocer con mucho orgullo por sus raíces hispanas a José Hernández, quien, de ser un orgulloso trabajador agrícola, se convirtió en un astronauta de la NASA a través de una ardua preparación, esfuerzo y constancia. José Moreno Hernández nació en French Camp, California, pero llama a Stockton, California, su ciudad natal. Su familia es orgullosamente originaria de La Piedad, Michoacán, México, con raíces indígenas purépechas. En una conversación con el entonces presidente de México, Felipe Calderón, José Hernández afirmó que de niño vivió la mitad del año en La Piedad, Michoacán, y la otra mitad en este gran país. Cuando era niño, José Hernández trabajó junto a su familia y otros trabajadores agrícolas en los campos de California, cosechando cultivos y mudándose de un pueblo a otro. Asistió a muchas escuelas y no aprendió a hablar inglés sino hasta la edad de 12 años. Su primer recuerdo del espacio fue cuando trató de ajustar una antena de la televisión para apreciar la misión de Apolo 17 en el año de 1972. José Hernández participó en Outward Bound durante la escuela secundaria, un programa federal trío que prepara a los estudiantes para la universidad. Se graduó en la Franklin High School en Stockton y mientras estaba en la universidad participó en el programa Matemáticas, Ingeniería, Logros en Ciencias, MESA, un programa de preparación académica que brinda apoyo a estudiantes de entornos con desventajas educativas para que puedan obtener títulos de 4 años en ciencias, tecnología, ingeniería o matemáticas, STEM Education. Obtuvo una licenciatura en Ingeniería Eléctrica por la Universidad del Pacífico en 1984 y en 1986 José Hernández obtuvo una maestría en Ingeniería Eléctrica e Informática por la Universidad de California en Santa Bárbara. De 1990 a 2004 trabajó en el Laboratorio Nacional Lawrence Livermore en la población de Livermore, California, y durante su estancia, junto con un colega comercial, desarrolló el primer sistema de imágenes de mamografía digital de campo completo, invención que desde entonces ayuda a la detección temprana del cáncer de mama. En febrero de 2006, completó el entrenamiento de candidato a astronauta, que incluyó sesiones informativas científicas y técnicas, instrucción intensiva en transbordadores y espacio internacional, estación de sistemas, formación fisiológica, T-38 de entrenamiento de vuelo y el agua y la supervivencia en la naturaleza de formación. Al completar esta capacitación inicial, José Hernández fue asignado a la rama del transbordador para apoyar las operaciones del Centro Espacial Kennedy en apoyo de los preparativos de lanzamiento y aterrizaje del transbordador. En mayo de 2007, José Hernández se desempeñó como acuanauta durante la misión Nemo 12 a bordo del laboratorio subacuático Aquarius, viviendo y trabajando bajo el agua durante 11 días. Trabajó en varias asignaciones técnicas hasta su selección el 15 de julio de 2008 como especialista de misión en la misión STS-128, que se lanzó al espacio el 28 de agosto de 2009. Y mientras estaba en órbita, José Hernández se convirtió en la primera persona en usar el idioma español en el espacio mientras tuiteaba. En el año 2009 fue asignado para trabajar en la sede de la NASA en Washington, D.C., donde se desempeñó como analista legislativo y ayudó en el desarrollo de la política especial, el paquete de presupuesto anual de la NASA, y sirvió de enlace y desarrollo de una estrategia eficaz que promovió la nueva visión del presidente sobre la exploración espacial. También es candidato para el Congreso de los Estados Unidos, autor de varios libros, incluida su recomendable autobiografía Reaching for the Stars y la versión infantil El niño que tocó las estrellas. Ex astronauta de la NASA e ingeniero estadounidense con raíces hispanas, orgullosamente mexicano, y representante y exponente de esfuerzo, dedicación y constancia, que ha aportado mucho a la vida de este país. Reconozco aquí con todos ustedes, ante todos ustedes, su trayectoria, y a nombre propio y del Consulado de México en Little Rock, le felicito y deseo que esta larga trayectoria sea ejemplo y motivación para toda la comunidad hispana y las nuevas generaciones en este país. Felicidades, José Hernández.
Hassan, Selagi, Zoyaha, Yuchiha, Muskogi. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dan Wildcat. I'm a Zoyaha, a Yuchi member of the Muskogee Nation of Oklahoma. And I tell you what, those of you who've been with us for the past couple of days, I think I get the honor of really one of the highlights of this whole fall festival here at the Museum of Native American History. And that's to really have a discussion with two NASA astronauts. We've got Jose Hernández and I've got John Harrington here. And we're just going to visit, and we've got a lot to talk about. We'll try to kind of monitor the chat. And if, we see questions that come in that don't know that we'll be able to answer all of them, but we'll try to, I'll try to monitor the chat. And then when we see, questions come in, try to weave those in when it works. So, yes, this is exciting. And I was telling both Jose and John before we went on that the Indigenuity yesterday, you guys, they talked about Star Trek, they talked about Star Wars, they talked about how this imagination, their imaginations were just really piked by this notion of going into outer space. And so, I thought we might start first of all with just kind of a real general discussion, because we're trying to highlight the way our cultures can very positively inform who we are and and our success in whatever endeavor we undertake. So I thought a good place to start, and I'll just throw out the question, John, Jose, whoever wants to go first can, but I'd like to ask you to maybe discuss just briefly how your cultural heritage contributed to your success. What's your own thoughts about that? So I don't know, who wants to take that one first? Jose, John?
I'll take a crack at it first. When I was a kid, I'll tell you a little story, Dan, that when I was a kid, I remember we used to travel from Mexico to California and follow the harvest of the crops, 9 months in California, 3 months back in Mexico. And then when I got to school age, Spanish, even though I was born here in the States, and I was born here because I was born during the harvest months. I have brothers and sisters born in the winter months, and they were born in Mexico. So just depending on the luck of the draw, what month you were born in dictated what country you were born in. But even though I was born in this country, my native language was Spanish, and we spent 3 months in Mexico, 9 months in California. And when I was at school age, I remember we used to go back to Mexico for those 3 months, and my cousins and friends down there would make fun of me because I would speak Spanish with an accent and I didn't know all the vocabulary. And then I would go back to California and go to school, and my friends would make fun of me because I was speaking English with an accent and, of course, did not know the full vocabulary. So, it was confusing times because, on one hand, I was too Mexican to be American. On the other, I was too American to be Mexican. And I would tell myself, what the heck am I? And very confusing times. And it wasn't until I was a senior in high school that I remember, how we have those senior floats, right? Yeah. And our junior class did not have a truck to build the float. And my dad had a truck and with a flatbed. But I knew my dad, he wasn't going to lend it out. He said, if you guys want to use it, it's fine, but you build it here in my house, in our house. Well, our house was a little 2-bedroom dilapidated rental in the worst part of Stockton, California. And I was embarrassed as heck to invite my friends. But I had no choice because we weren't going to have a float. And I finally fessed up. And I remember my friends came. And I remember my mom started bringing out burritos, tacos, agua fresca. And my dad would take the boombox out, put music. My brothers and sisters would help out. And it was a 3-day event after school. And each day, the crowd got bigger and bigger and bigger. And I remember the very last day, one of my friends, he had one of those Smokey and the Bandit Camaros or Firebirds, brand new ones. Yeah. So he had a brand new car. And he came up to me, he says, I really envy you. And I said, envy me? Why? I said, look where I'm living at, man. I said, well, yeah, he said, I got a new car, but my mom and dad are divorced. I never see my dad. My mom's a nurse. She's working overtime. I come home to an empty house and you come home to this. So this is what I want to come home to. And that's when I realized, I'm going to take the best of both cultures and define who Jose is. And so it makes you a stronger person. It makes you a more well-rounded person. You've got a bigger picture of things, especially when it comes time to solving problems. And that's what I get from my culture is I take the best of the cultures I'm exposed to, and that's what defines me, Daniel. That's right. And so that's how I would define it.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I have a similar experience of having a Yuchi father, and my mother comes from farm folk that were settlers who ended up in the U.S. from it looks like Wales. So so I had my Yuchi family and my farmer family, Southeast Kansas farmer family, and it was really a marvelous experience growing up, being able to be a part of both of those worlds. And it does help shape things, yes. John, what are your thoughts?
Well, a couple of things that Jose mentioned that lit a little bell in my head. I used to live, I'm from Oklahoma originally. On my mom's side of the family, I'm a citizen of Chickasaw Nation. On my dad's side of the family, from European descent. So kind of come together. I had one great grandmother come to Oklahoma and the land runs, and another one's already there, from Chickasaw Nation. So, and I moved around a lot as a kid. I moved about 14 times by the time I graduated from high school. Did not grow up in Oklahoma. My great grandmother spoke the language fluently. She spoke Chickasaw. So I say, Sohocha Foet. My name is John Harrington. Chickasaw, I'm a Chickasaw citizen. But I didn't grow up in the environment where I learned the language and learned the culture. I was very proud of who I am and where I come from on both sides of my family. And I did find out on my mom's side, my grandmother's descent on her came off the Mayflower. So this is a mix of all different cultures, everybody coming together. When Jose was talking about being, in Mexico and they give him a hard time there, and being in California, get a hard time there. I went to school in Brownsville, Texas. My dad worked in Matamoros, and I would walk across the border when I was 14 years old, no ID, dark skinned, I'm not Hispanic, but I looked Hispanic, and I walk across the border and the Border Patrol guys would start speaking Spanish to me. And I'm like, hey guys, I don't speak Spanish. I live right over here, about 100 yards away. And I go to school, and because I didn't speak Spanish, I would get into trouble. People would give me a hard time, not knowing Spanish, because I looked Hispanic. But what I like to think about what my culture has given me is looking back at what the history of both sides of my family on the Chickasaw side is, that you look at all the things that our tribe has done throughout recorded history, from Hernando de Soto, the very first European contact. From that point forward, my tribe made decisions that allowed them to survive against the harshest conditions. And so be it growing up in the Southeast and having to deal with Hernando de Soto and that whole European contact, to later on, eventually siding, with the British against the French, with the Americans against the British. And then Andrew Jackson, kicks them all out of the Southeast and moves them to Indian Territory. So, I like to think that it's the decisions that they made that allowed, come up to this ability to solve problems and for the best of your survival. So I like to think that I carry my ancestors' thought process and their desire to take care of their families and make the most of life, that I carry to what I do every day.
That's almost a good definition for resilience in a way, because, you talk about, often children that may be coming from, someone would look at it from the outside and say, oh, they're so poor, socioeconomically disadvantaged. And yet, Jose's story reminds me of that, of some of my relatives, very, very, someone would have looked at their house and said, oh, those people are poor. Of course, if my relatives would have heard that, those would have been fighting words, because they never thought of themselves as poor, right? They were rich. They were very rich in relatives and relationships. And I think that's a really an important part, that successful people bring with them when whatever they're doing, that recognition that, we're never in it alone, and if we can just remember that, it's a good formula, to be successful. So, this really, I wanted to raise this. I told you yesterday, the Indigenuity, we were all talking about, space, the final frontier, where no man has gone before, and they were all big Star Wars fans. And it reminded me that one of the things that I'd like to get both of your response to is, I'm amazed at how many astronauts that, when they come back, to Earth, that how much they say the impact of seeing this beautiful blue-green marble, this Mother Earth from outer space, meant to them. I mean, everyone talks about what that means. And, I was thinking, we're only 50, we've got to be right close to the 50th anniversary of the first NASA Landsat. I think the first Landsat 1 must have gone up, 71, maybe something like that. And so we're at about the 50th anniversary of putting satellites up to give us images of the Earth. But I just wanted to ask you, given all the issues we're facing with environmental degradation, global climate change, loss of species habitat, and unfortunately, some species on the planet. What was how did you feel when you were able to look back and see the Earth? And has that really changed any of your thinking about, the decisions you make in your everyday life and so on and so forth? Just wondering about that.
Well, I'll take this one for sure. The guy over my shoulder is me.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah. And so, the first time, for me, stepping out, looking beneath my feet, looking out through the hatch of the airlock, it sits 220 miles straight down. It's a long way down, but it's moving beneath you. And, and not just during the spacewalks, but when we first got into orbit, it was opening up the payload bay doors for me, because I had to throw the switches for the payload bay doors. And when those open up and the payload bay of the shuttle is facing the Earth, and you just see this, incredible mosaic of the Earth laid out beneath you. It's eye-watering because it's moving, and it's surreal. It's not just something you've seen on TV or seen in a movie. And it's it's the reality of seeing that for the first time was beautiful. And it was it was a sensation of floating too, being in this environment that I'd never been in before. But what really was a goosebump moment for me was really essentially in this photo behind me. As a rock climber, I was on the very end of the ultimate cliff, for me. And it wasn't necessarily looking back at the Earth, but it was looking past the Earth. It was looking out over the limb of the Earth, out into the vastness of the universe, when there was nothing else between me and whatever else was out there. Yeah. And so there's a deep appreciation for where you're from, because you see it, but then also what else is out there. And that ultimate question I think we all have is, are we alone in this universe? And in that one moment in your lifetime when there is nothing, I mean, you can be on the Earth and look up and it's the same, essentially the same thing. Yeah. But when you're above the atmosphere looking out and you think about it, it kind of broadens the senses. And so I came back with a huge appreciation for my place, my insignificance on the Earth, but how important it is to take care of the Earth. There's that overview effect that a lot of folks talk about. That was a fundamental game changer for me coming back. And we'll discuss this more as we go into this, because there's a variety of things to talk about. Is that, if we're not here, we're not going out there. Right. The idea is that we have a fundamental responsibility to take care of our own planet, because if we can't do that, we have no business going anyplace else. The idea of making it, terraforming another planet and making it Earth-like when we're not doing a really good job here. And so I think that was my perspective of seeing the Earth, gave me a much broader view of probably my place and my responsibility to it. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, thank you, John. Jose, how about you?
Well, to me, everybody talks about how it does change people, because you get that overview effect, the orbital perspective, if you will. And I remember, when I went up there, I was the flight engineer. So to me, it's kind of like the best seat in the house, because you're kind of sitting right in the middle of pilots. And, you do have a panoramic view as you blast off. Not that you're seeing anything, but you still have that view. And, it's a very dynamic trip up there. You go from 0 to 17,500 miles an hour in 8.5 minutes, and you're up 220, 230 miles above ground, orbiting Earth once every 90 minutes. Well, because I was part of the flight crew, I remember it took us about 90 minutes to get out of our seats. Meanwhile, the people my colleagues in the middeck immediately get out of their seats, and they open up the payload bay doors, as John alluded to. So you could kind of hear them and talking behind you, and they're floating around you and everything, and you're in such an anxious to experience 0G, right? But we have to do silly things like activate life support systems and purge fuel lines, stuff like that, right? So once we get through that one orbit, it's time for us to myself and the pilots to unbuckle their seatbelts, and we do it. And you start floating, And, I kind of I said, okay, I'm going to go down to mid deck and because I have to change from the orange pumpkin suit to street clothes. And so I kind of do my best Superman, clumsy, I may add, best Superman impersonation as you go down to the mid deck. And but before I go and change clothes, there's a little window there.
Yeah.
And it's pointing straight down towards Earth. And I said, oh man, I'm going to see the world for the first time from a perspective less than 600 individuals out of more than 7 billion, almost 8 billion now.
Yeah.
I had the privilege to see. And I'm going to join this under 600 club that has the ability to see our Earth. And what am I going to see? And lots of things go in your mind. My Miss Cotton's 5th grade class came to mind because that's when we learned geology, and of course the way we geography, the way we learned geography was a world map, political map, different colored countries. She would spin it. You stop at a country, you got to do the country and the capital. And so when I went down there, I naively said, okay, I'm going to be able to differentiate countries. Obviously, I didn't expect to see them in different colors, but I expected them to differentiate them. But we're flying right over North America, and you can see Canada clearly, US and Mexico, maybe a little bit of South America. And when I looked at it, I said, my gosh, I said, I had to come out of this world to have this epiphany that borders are man-made concepts, human-made concepts designed to separate us. And how sad, because from this perspective, I couldn't tell the difference where Canada ended or the US and the US began, or when the US ended and Mexico began. And I said, man, we need to get every world leader up here to have this same aha moment, because I guarantee you, Daniel, our world will be a much more peaceful place if we did.
Yeah, thank you. That's a beautiful story. And, so we're starting to get some questions, and this is an interesting one because we started talking about culture, how you brought your culture with you. And I think that's something that's important too. I think a lot of young people today are having the benefit that they're more likely to be in institutions of education that will honor and recognize, the diversity they may represent. And that wasn't always the case, just 3, 4, 5 decades ago. And it's starting to change. But I'm thinking about boundaries now, because I've got a great question in here, and I'm not sure who this comes from, but I'm going to read the question. And the question was, this is for you, John. So there's often this kind of dichotomy people have in their mind about sort of indigenous people, American Indians, living more naturally in a natural manner. Sure. And the question was, did you ever encounter in your career any sort of tension or difficulty with this kind of notion that, well, your heritage is American Indian, but now you're really in the midst of this scientific, approach to life as an astronaut? And I know that there are young Native kids that often wrestle with this idea too, somehow that one's opposed to the other. So what would your response to that be?
I would just say, go look back at what our ancestors were capable of doing. Long before Western civilization came to the shores, what were our ancestors doing? We were building mound cultures. Cahokia, largest civilization on this continent, before Philadelphia, I think, something like that. My tribe and homelands came out of the mound culture, Moundville, Alabama, in that area. Go to Chaco Canyon, go to Mesa Verde, go to these places where our ancestors were building phenomenal structures that stand today. We're doing the Three Sisters, beans, corns, and squash. We're cultivating things. They were biologists. They were astronomers. You go to the medicine wheel and the bighorns. You go, there's at Cahokia, there's actually a wooden medicine. There's a wooden Stonehenge that they built out of that. So you could see, the different, the solstices and such. So I say it's in your DNA. If you kind of wrestle with it, wrestle the facts in your DNA. And if you want to be an engineer, you want to be a scientist, you got to go through the process. You got to learn mathematics. You got to do calculus. You got to do all those things because that's the world we live in. But rest on what your ancestors were capable of doing, because if they hadn't done those things, you would not have had the opportunity to go to school, you know, and to try and solve those problems and try to make your community a better place. And so if you're going to wrestle with something, wrestle with the fact that they were good at it. You know?
Yeah.
And I'd like to think about that just leads you to what you're capable of doing. So.
Yeah. And Jose, I know you've spent a lot of time in Mexico, and I know from your background, you're certainly familiar with farming, but I think, if I'm not mistaken now, it's pretty clear that corn was domesticated in the South, and that there were as many as, you talk about hybrids and varieties, that indigenous people of, Central and South America were doing experiments with corn for several thousand years before, Europeans ever got to this continent. That's pretty phenomenal.
It is. And, when we talk about Native Americans, sometimes we kind of like put the border between the U.S. and Mexico. But the one thing I want to make clear is that we're all Native Americans. I mean, I have Native American blood in me because, you've got the Yaquis up in northern Mexico. You got the Tarahumara Indians. You've got the I'm Tarascan from Tarascan background. You've got the Aztecs. You've got the Mayans. And all those are Native American by definition.
Yes.
And you're right. As you go down south, these folks were farmers. And they domesticated the corn. But not only that, I'll give you a fun fact. The tomato originated from them. The tomato was taken to Italy. Think about it. The Italians are known for tomato sauce and their well, 300-400 years ago, there was none of that stuff. It was until they exported the tomato to Italy that they started developing those type of foods. You just got to look at the pyramids that are still standing in downtown Mexico City, the Aztecs. The Aztecs. You got to look at the pyramids in the Yucatan Peninsula by the Mayans. Who invented the concept of zero? It was so there's a lot of contribution by Native American people that really sort of set the foundation for the path so that other folks can then start taking it to a higher level. But the foundation was clearly set by Native Americans, both in North America and in Central and South America.
Yeah, and it's kind of interesting, isn't it, that particularly when you look at the cultures, the large cultures, some people might even use the term civilizations of the Aztecs, the Mayans, and the Incas. Talk about space thinkers. The calendars the Mayans developed, it is every bit as accurate as a Gregorian calendar.
Right.
And it operates on a totally different system. But it's, to me, this is the affirmation that for indigenous people, we really have to honor that history and start drawing on that, as some inspiration, so that, the theme we've adopted is one I've been wrestling with for about 15 years. I call it Indigenuity. And that is, let's apply our ancient wisdom to solve very modern problems. And I think that's something that everyone can get excited about. So, Hey,
Daniel, can I follow up on something like?
Yeah, please do,
We
John.
talked about what we didn't have growing up. I mean, I never learned about Cahokia. I never learned about the mountain culture.
Yeah.
That was not in the history books.
Yeah,
Like
right.
you start talking about manifest destiny, you talk about this, westward expansion, for the glory of God or whatever.
Yeah.
And behind it, wrote over those type of things, that there was an advanced civilization living on this continent for the longest time. And that was never carried over in our history books. We didn't learn about that. I think they didn't find Cahokia until the road construction for the interstate highway system in the Eisenhower administration. Part of that was funding for archaeological digs, and one of those things was Cahokia, right outside of St. Louis. And so, and that's something that I think now that if you were to bring up, do my research with Native kids on Duck Valley Reservation for my PhD was, are there any examples in your textbooks of Native Americans as natural scientists or engineers?
Right.
It's not in your curriculum. It's not.
Right.
So how do we bring it into the curriculum? How do we get that into an environment where kids can appreciate that's who they are? That's what their culture is. That's what they're capable of doing. So that's something I thought we didn't have it, but, so it's a good time to start.
No, I think that's a great point. In fact, we talked about that yesterday with the Indigenerds, and one of the points they made is, we're using indigenous futurism. I learned about indigenous futurism. We're imagining future. But it was pointed out that one of the things is we are defining who we are. We're telling the stories. We're writing those narratives. And I remember, my dear friend and mentor, Vine Deloria Jr. was always saying, I know Indians are good talkers. He says, but we've got to start writing books. We have to tell our stories. We have to tell our histories. And I think that's such a great point, John. I'm glad you made that up. In fact, Rachel Allen, talking about, this intersection between our tribal nations and NASA, Rachel Allen, this is from Facebook, asked, are you aware of the fact that Oklahoma State University just got a NASA grant? It's called Native Earth, Native Sky. And in it, they're going to explore several Oklahoma tribes' relationships with the sky. What was their star knowledge? And she just wanted to know, are you going to be involved in that at all? Or were you familiar with that?
I'm not familiar with the grant at all, but no, I'd love to. I work on behalf of the Chickasaw Nation. So I work for Governor Anantubby and folks there. So anything I could do in the state of Oklahoma that could further that knowledge base, I'm all for it. I may live in Montana, but I'm from there.
Yeah, got it. Well, so we got into this issue here, just manifest destiny, this idea. So one of the things that, someone mentioned yesterday, they said, well, we know Star Wars has a kind of, Star Trek had sort of a colonial edge to it, but yet, you can still see some redeeming themes in the story. And this is that imagination at work. And I have not heard anyone from NASA use this term, but I've heard a couple of our space entrepreneurs talk about colonizing space. And I've got to say, my reaction as an indigenous person was, oh my gosh, I hope we're not going to, make the mistakes of the past when we go to space. You've sort of already alluded to that, John, that, if we're going to play that same kind of history over again, whoever's out there isn't probably going to be welcoming us with open arms. Okay. Sure. But, so I guess here's the question I'd like to ask both of you. So do you think that humankind has reached the maturity that we can go to those places throughout the cosmos and the universe, and without carrying a kind of colonizing ideology with us? I don't know. Jose, I'll start with you. What's your take on that? Because it seems like we still have a lot of problems here getting along, like you were talking about the borders.
Yeah. Well, absolutely, Dan. I don't think we're mature enough at this point. I think we still have that colonization mentality. Look, it's only been 200-300 years when all that had been occurring, when the New World was found and all this occurred. Well, not much has changed since then. I hate to admit to it, but that's the plain truth and fact. But having said that, space exploration has to start somewhere. And I'm also smart enough to realize that any place that has any inkling of life where we would be upsetting in terms of colonization is light years away, and it's going to be 300, 400, 500, 1,000 years from now when perhaps we may be able to get to those civilizations. It is at that time that I think we may be mature enough to handle it.
Mm-hmm.
But if we were given the tools today to say, hey, you can be on planet X where we know there's life, no, we wouldn't be able to handle. And so I think it's a natural evolution phase that has to occur, Daniel. And so this is why I say, okay, we're not, just because we can't handle it today doesn't mean we shouldn't be pushing space exploration, because we're not going to get there today. We're just laying the foundation for our future generations to be able to get there. So going to the moon, yes, we should be learning how to go to the moon and learn how to live away from our planet, develop the technologies, overcome the technical hurdles, develop propulsion systems so that we can then set our sights within 15 years from now to go to Mars. Again, it's an uninhabited planet, so we're not encroaching on the civilization, but we're learning. But certainly 500, 1,000 years from now, when we have the technologies, I think with technologies comes that maturity along the way, and then So that's my thought. That's my 2 cents worth.
I really appreciate that perspective, because like it's probably unrealistic this is all going to happen overnight, and so there's still time to grow, and maybe this is the challenge we give young people. We need people who can imagine and envision a very different kind of world than the one we're currently occupying. Okay. And John, your thoughts?
Sure.
This whole issue of colonizing space.
Sure. You bring up the Star Trek, the Trekkie fans. If you think for all Gene Roddenberry did, if you look at the flight deck of the Starship Enterprise, you see multiple ethnicities, you see multiple languages, you see multiple, different genders, you see aliens, you see, looking at people doing for a common good. Let's go to the International Space Station. You start looking who's on board. You've got Japanese, you've got Europe, you got, people from France, you've got, Russians, you got Americans, you've got this. The neat thing about it for me, having been a naval officer for 22 years of my career, when my original job in the military was to hunt Russian submarines, Soviet submarines. Fast forward, 10, 15 years later, I'm in the belly of a Russian aircraft flying back from the Black Sea to Moscow next to a Russian cosmonaut pointing out the window where he was born. So for me, that was a fundamental shift in my appreciation for another, somebody from another government or country where I've been trained, that this was my enemy. This was somebody that I need to be wary of. And I found that I was in an environment where that person's just like me. They have the same type of interests. They have the same motivations in life, a different political system. But if we can bring folks together and solve a problem, the International Space Station is a phenomenal engineering achievement. I mean, it is. It's been flying in space since, for 21 years. We've had people on board for 21 years, 22 years, 21 years on board. So, it's an amazing thing. And it's been from folks all around the country, and the folks that I trained with were fabulous folks. I would like to see that. If we're going to go someplace else, if we want to go and explore, go to an exploration to Mars, let's do it as a collective whole. Let's take the nationalistic attitude out of it, because, if we're taking our boundary issues here and making boundary issues on another planet, then we're not, we haven't learned anything. I was reading Bill Nye talking about colonization of space. Wrong word. Do we call it settlements? Do we call it settlers? Well, you go to the West Bank, you talk about settlers. That's a whole different attitude. So what's the vocabulary you use? There was an article written by a woman, I think it's Carolyn Haskins. I might get that wrong, but it's called The Racial Language of Space Exploration. And it deals with that idea of colonization. What are we trying to accomplish? And you look at the people that have the money that want to go and colonize Mars. You talk about Elon Musk. You talk about private individuals that have a lot of money, still government funded in some respects. And, the previous vice president talked about private property, taking freedom and private property to another planet. I'm going, whoa, time out, folks. Let's take a step back and say, are we taking that type of ethic? I wouldn't call it ethics. Take that type of mentality to another planet and just carry on what we know does not work here. And how can we solve that in another place? And I think we need to really fundamentally pay attention to that. And the people that bring that up, hopefully there are a few folks out there that are looking at it from the white lens and looking at it from more of an indigenous lens and saying, yeah, it was bad for them. It was not the New World. Maybe New World for them, but not New World for the people who are already here.
Right.
You know, so I think there was a recent mission that crashed into the moon, I think, and they said who the country was. They spread tardigrades, you know, those little teeny I don't know what bugs or what they are, but they put a life form on the moon. Mm-hmm. You know, well, maybe they won't exist, you know, but they may. Who knows? They can live in really, really cold environments. So, you know, we've already seeded another planet with, you know, another life form. And well, what effect is that going to have? You know,
right?
You got to be cognizant of what you're doing.
Yeah. Well, you know, there's a theme that I think is coming out of this discussion, and I like it. It's all about kind of a mindfulness of at one level, sort of our in the universe, in the cosmos, that little bitty piece each of us are. And yet at the same time, it seems to me that what you're both saying, and maybe this is why the indigenous, maybe we got young indigenous people who are engaged in this thinking about the future and space and all of that, is that your comment really, I've been thinking about it, John, that, you know, it wasn't just the earth, it was seeing that vastness behind it, that being able to actually experientially see that is got to be, you know, it's akin to what Jose's talking about. You know, we create so many borders, we create so many boundaries. And I do think this, I know for the Zoyaha people, the Yuchi people, we were mound builders too, and neighbors a few hundred miles away from the Chickasaws. But
we're all related. We're all related.
Yeah, we're all related. Again, that's an important point, isn't it? As our Dakota and Nakota speakers say in their language, Mitakia Oyase, we're all related. And I think maybe that's kind of the weird thing is it takes some people, not everyone, but it takes some people to get away from this planet, to realize, to have this epiphany that, wow, much of what we have constructed is largely artificial, particularly in the way we think and how we treat each other. And that's pretty hopeful that, you know, there are other ways to think about how we're related and, you know, the responsibilities we have.
Well, I think one of the things that, you know, talking about Jose's background, traveling, you know, 3 months here, 9 months there, going back and forth, have this experience of a variety of places. You know, one of the things I think that is a problem in this country is you have folks that are so scope locked in the place they're from or where they're born, they have not stepped outside of that boundary. They've not stepped outside of their comfort zone. They haven't stepped outside and realized that this person over there is not somebody to be feared. It's somebody to be learned from. It's something that you can gain some appreciation, respect for who they are. I think one of the things that I'm blessed that my parents, even though I sometimes complain about it, I moved 14 times by the time I got out of high school. I 14 different times to learn other, you know, different folks. And then in my military career, I've been all around the world and I've worked with folks in all these different places, and I have a huge appreciation for other cultures, you know, and to me, that is something that I would not have had if I had not stepped outside of my comfort zone and made the decision. So, you know, if we want to get along in this world and we want to go to, you know, back to the moon and Mars and do it as a collective whole, then we need to understand and appreciate that there are folks here that have had that experience and listen to them and say, okay, well, how do we best, you know, take that next step into that, do the exploration that's going to, you know, benefit life on Earth. So.
Yeah, I really like that idea that it seems like our International Space Station, it would be nice if all of those kinds of explorations and things could be done not by a nation, but just by humankind.
Yeah.
we just come together and say, hey, you know what, we're all going to work on this. And that's the beautiful part of cultures. Cultures are a little bit like lenses. We put on a lens and then we can see something. Someone has a different lens. The reality doesn't change. You know, all that changes is I see something much clearer with this lens, but what's out there didn't change. And it seems to me like that's kind of where we're at now. I think with science, there's a whole big issue now about rechanging science. They're even talking about something called Convergent Science, where we kind of get people out of these boxes they think in, and universities out of the silos, where we've got engineering over here, economics over here, medicine over there, poetry and art over here. And people are saying, you know what? All of those activities produce knowledge, and we need to kind of bring those together. And that seems to be kind of consistent, emergent with this idea of going into space. So I don't know, you guys are both very much involved in, you know, practical applications of science. What do you think about the likelihood that we can reform maybe education in a way that students have a richer appreciation of different kinds of knowledges and ways of knowing, you know? And because you guys have been in the belly of the beast, NASA. What's your thought on that?
Well,
Jose?
Take a crack at that one. I can follow up.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, with respect to education, you know, it's clear to me that science and technology is the heartbeat of any economy. Mm-hmm. And so to keep at the forefront of innovation, we need to engage all segments of society in every country to get involved in science and technology, because you know, there's a shortage of scientists and engineers in the world, that and they're greatly needed. If we're to keep going and pushing the threshold of innovation, specifically space exploration, then we need to make a concerted effort to expose, especially the underrepresented populations. I mean, I live here in the Central Valley, where I used to work picking fruits and vegetables throughout the Central Valley, and I have a foundation called Reaching for the Stars, and we specialize in exposing kids at the 5th grade to STEM careers, and then we have a summer academy at a university where they spend 6 weeks, 7th grade through 12th grade, so that they see themselves in a university setting and they learn the core curriculum of math and science that they're going to be exposed to the following year, and do well in school. And then we have a scholarship program that, funding allowing, we give to our seniors that are graduating this program. So we try to do that, but I think it behooves us that we need to be very proactive in exposing kids at a very young age about science and engineering, because by the time they're in high school, it's too late. Even
I couldn't agree more.
If they didn't take the courses, it's too late. And so this is why we need to reach out at young age. And John, I'll let you talk now.
Hands-on learning. Everything I've done in my career. I mean, I can go from the time, you know, really when I got kicked out of college as a freshman. You know, I didn't study, wasn't motivated. But I took an experience as a rock climber to the mountains, and I worked on a survey crew where these guys were using mathematics in their daily practice. And I was getting paid $4 an hour to be a part of a crew that, you know, I was a rock climber. I was a guy doing the rope work, and I was a guy at the end of a prism and a beam of light. And I was learning about how light travels at a constant speed and blah, blah, blah. So the idea of learning the practical nature of mathematics for me opened up this door that I didn't have before. It wasn't in a textbook. It wasn't something that was esoteric that I looked at. Right. Because we all say, when am I ever going to use this? You know, or why am I going to do this? Well, here's a way. And so the idea is to show them examples of the practical nature of that, to hope you motivate them to want to learn more. you got to learn it. You got to put forth the effort. You got to expend the energy, and it's frustrating. It's hard, and we all know that. But if you have a motivation to do it, it makes it that much more palatable. And so, in college, then I went in the military. I didn't think I was a very good I didn't think I could memorize things. I was I thought I was terrible at memorizing. My goodness, I get in the military, I'm memorizing checklists, systems. If you don't, the more you memorize them and learn them, the safer you're going to be.
Right.
Space shuttles, a flight engineer. We were both MS2. I rode up sitting in the seat in the middle too, and I'm going. My job was to know the systems. My job was to know the procedures. And if you can know the procedures, but you don't know the system, the procedures don't really make a lot of sense. And so, it's this idea of the hands-on application of what you're learning. It takes you that next step. So when you start talking about STEM or STEAM, you want to toss the A in there for art. I think, who was it? Einstein said, art is science and science is art. They're all intertwined, and there's a creativity that goes along with all of that, from solving problems, being analytic, to being creative and thinking about that next thing outside of the box. And if we can expose students to that early on, like as Jose was saying, early on, 5th grade to 8th grade, if you haven't gotten by 8th grade to motivation, it's really hard to catch them up after that. So, find something that motivates a kid to want to learn.
Yeah. And, I really love what you said about the hands-on. And, in fact, this is just an ongoing discussion I've had for the last year with a lot of people. I've been very fortunate because I've been able to work with people at NASA, at NSF and University Center for Atmospheric Research and National Center for Atmospheric Research, because most of my work the last 15 years has been about climate change. So, and its impact on indigenous people. But, I think one of the things that your careers and the work you've done illustrate is I grew up in a time when, I'm not kidding you, what I thought science was? I thought it was the experimental method. I thought if you haven't done an experiment, then you don't know it. Okay. And that's kind of part of the problem, to the extent that we really ingrain that message into young children. We've got people my age now who are saying, I'm not going to believe in climate change, because you know why? You can't do an experiment to demonstrate that you know what you're talking about. And I'm going like, oh my God, we've got to, this is the problem. We all know science is much broader than just the experimental method. And I think, the work that you've done and been engaged in and how you've tried to advance knowledge sort of illustrates that. Yeah. Do you still conduct experiments? Sure. But you learn a lot through systems design, modeling, and sometimes just paying attention, being really observant about what's going on around you. Yeah. Yeah. I like that. That's good. We've got about 15 minutes here, I think, to play with to kind of wrap this up. So let me ask this question. We've been talking the last 2 days about indigenuity. And the simplest formulation is just to say, and we've already been talking about it, sort of taking ancient wisdom to solve modern problems. Okay. And so I've thought a lot about, well, what would I take from Yuchi traditions to help us address, very modern problems? And the first thing came to me is just this kind of simple lesson of the way, in fact, when you go to my grounds, okay, and our traditional chief speaks at a ceremony, it's funny when he speaks to everyone, he welcomes them as relatives. They may not be Yuchi. They may be Black. They may be white. But he says, I'm welcoming our relatives to our grounds. And it's that notion of, we are all related. We are all, as one of my students famously said one time in a debate, we were talking about tribes, and we got into a really good discussion in class about, well, can you talk about indigenous philosophy, or are you overgeneralizing? Do you have to talk about Chickasaw philosophy and Yuchi philosophy and Lakota philosophy? So we're having that great discussion, and both sides were making great arguments. And this one young woman, and I wish I could learn her name. I keep asking people who were in that class, would that woman reach out to me? Because she didn't say a lot, but she raised up her hand so everyone's going on, and she goes, Dr. Wildcat, I have the answer. And I said, oh, please share it with us. And she said, I think the answer is we're all the same. We're different. And you know what? Everyone in class, just like you got, everyone in class smiled and goes like, yeah, that pretty much sums it up. That, yeah, we're all the same. We're different, and that is a lesson that I think my Yuchi ancestors understood. We knew we weren't like the Chickasaws. We were related, but it was all right for other people to be different. That wasn't necessarily a bad thing. We'll keep our Yuchi ways, Chickasaws keep their ways, Cherokees keep theirs, but that's something that I think we do well to nurture today. So this is the question. Can you think of your heritage and that wisdom you would bring from the ancestors? What would you think might be useful to help us solve some modern problems? So John, I'll start with you first.
Sure. Well, I'll go back to, first encounter with Europeans and my tribe's experience with that. Here you have Hernando Soto coming ashore in Florida and laying waste across the southeastern part of this continent along the way. And, a very formidable individual with conquistadors and you name it, horses and whatnot, and feral and pigs, which are now, kind of endemic to southeastern United States. And it came to my tribe, and my tribe sat back and kind of, rather than confronting what they knew to be, probably, annihilation, they said, what can we do to step back and deal with this situation? They kind of gave up one of their villages because they were dispersed, and they gave up one of their villages, and Hernando de Soto settled in for the winter back in the Little Ice Age, I think it was, and kind of got this feeling that, hey, this is kind of a docile people. They're not putting up a stink. We can live this way. And, it's that point in time when the next spring rolled around, he's ready to continue on. He wants to take slaves and wives, and the tribe rose up and said no, and decimated him and his conquistadors in a battle one night, and mortally wounded him. And that was kind of the end of Hernando de Soto. So there's a level that comes with patience. The way I look at it is, what can we do to sit and analyze the situation we're in, be thoughtful about that situation, and say, how can we best use this to our advantage? Yeah. And they did. And that goes back to this idea of leadership. Governor Anatubby was on earlier. The idea is that, our leaders will make decisions that are in the best interest of their people, not in their personal best interests, but in the best interests of those that they lead. And if you go forward with that thought process, that we make these decisions that are the good for everyone, not for one person or a particular, how do you, that's going to carry you much farther. And look where the Chickasaw Nation is today. So if they hadn't done that over a successive period of leadership, we would not be having this conversation.
Yeah. And, by the way, that is such a great illustration also of, I think the systemic character of all humanity's propensity. They have this ability to be systems thinkers and to really look at the complexity of situations and make an assessment. And I think we sell that short. We act like systems thinking is something real new. Well, our ancestors were all systems thinkers. Man, you can't look at those Aztec, Mayan, Inca civilizations and not say, these were systems thinkers, So I don't know. Jose, what do you think?
Well, I think one of the greatest things is just having a respect for what
Right.
what they needed to for the winter and survive for the next spring, and didn't go overly abundant at the expense of our environment. And
Right.
and I think they modern society tends to not learn from our past as our
Right.
as our ancestors, I think, very, very well respected our past and learned from it and didn't commit the same errors. Whereas modern history now, we always seem to be recreating the same errors and making the same mistakes, whether it's in politics, whether it's in environmental policy, whatever you have. I mean, that's what we need to learn is having that respect and having the ability and the humbleness to say, okay, I'm learning from them because this is what happened. I'm not going to commit, as opposed to saying, oh, it can't happen to me, and it does.
Right. And I that's so important, because I do think, this is part of mankind's, at this point, still immaturity. We're not really paying attention the way we should. And I think that's something that we can all, emphasize. There's a lot of talk today about developing a sense of mindfulness. And I think, this is one of the things that the three of us, if we thought back about our ancestors, and there's nothing magical or exotic about it, but if you're living in the world in such a way that you're depending on the land, the air, the water, the life that's around you for your life, you pay attention.
Sure.
And I wonder if John, you've mentioned hands-on learning. I've been arguing we need to get students out of doors. Let's get them out of doors. If we're going to teach science, if we're going to teach biology, if we're going to teach take them out of doors and let's let them have that experiential learning. They don't need to read it in a book. You can talk to them about it, tell stories, illustrate it in real life. I wonder what you guys think about that.
I'm glad you brought that up. About 3 years ago, I got involved in a movie called Into America's Wild. And it's an IMAX movie where myself and a young Inuit woman, Ariel Tweedo from Alaska, who was in a TV show called Flying Wild Alaska, a young lady, we kind of traveled the country to go to these kind of out of the way places that people haven't seen before. And not just the beauty of those, but the beauty of the people from there.
Yes.
And, in COVID, we premiered it at the Smithsonian Air and Space Museum on the 4th of February. And then boom, I couldn't, hopefully I get to promote it some more. But the idea is that, we've been cloistered now for about, a year and a half, going on 2 years. And there's this fundamental desire to get outside and show kids what nature can give them, what they can learn from nature. Yeah. Those type of things we can see that just fill our hearts with joy to go out and experience it. And now it's a great time to you want to get out and do it now. And that was a fun movie. It's Into America's Wilds. That's my plug for the IMAX movie. But I want to follow up one thing you said before, this idea of mindfulness.
Yes.
We need to value the people that have the knowledge. There's an incredible depth of knowledge around the world that can make our lives better. And unfortunately, this past couple of years has brought out this idea to not trust the experts. Okay. Well, they're the experts for a reason. They're the experts. They've spent the time, the knowledge, the education. They've worked hard, and they're doing it for a purpose. You talk about epidemiologists, you talk about scientists, people that are developing these medicines, is that, they're doing it for a purpose, for the betterment of the human race. And so we need to value that. We need to value that expertise. And unfortunately, a lot of folks don't, you hear those discussions. I don't believe that. I believe this over here. Well, what's data to support the conclusion you have over there? Is it supported by real, honest to goodness, hard facts, or is it supported by supposition or whatever else? I feel this way. No, let's do the cold hard facts and be able to appreciate, be mindful of the people that have the knowledge.
Yeah. Jose, your thoughts?
Yeah, experiential learning is very, very important, Daniel. It builds upon what's known as, a well-rounded individual in terms of social emotional intelligence. There's a great book out there by Daniel Goleman, who, by the way, taught here in Stockton. We're very proud to claim him as one of ours. But he talks about that. He talks about that. Look, you can have a person who gets straight A's, but never steps outside or into the lab, but academically is a straight A student, or you get a person who's a B+, B- student, but it's outside, it's in the lab, and it's fumbling with cables and everything. And who would you rather have? Hey, I would rather have the B student because that person is going to be well-rounded. So experiential learning needs to be part of the overall learning process.
Yes.
So I totally agree with you on that.
Yeah. I've just got to share this. Diane Barker put this on Facebook. And again, this is kind of what we've been talking about, all hour. She says, to me, the most sophisticated, elegant, and powerful contribution of all indigenous communities is the wisdom to understand that we are all related, connected, tied to the same destiny. Learn by observing nature. Don't destroy nature in order to learn. That pretty nice conclusion there, Diane.
Yes.
Appreciate you sharing that. I'm going to just give you each a minute. Any final thoughts you would give to young people who are maybe thinking school's no fun, and I'm not any good, and maybe they're not thinking school's for them? Any words of encouragement of what they might do to sort of maybe they'll be a future astronaut. I don't know. Or maybe they'll be an organic farmer, Yeah, we need a lot of those too. So final comments from both of you, gentlemen.
Well, I would tell that individual to make sure they explore and understand what it is that's their passion. I said, find your passion, and then go do it.
Yes.
I have 5 kids, Daniel. I have 5 kids, and never have I thrust upon them that, hey, you need to be an engineer. You need to go to college, or you need to do this or do that. I always tell them, what's your passion? And I always told them, I said, look, my preference is you get a minimum undergraduate degree, so that whatever you study, at least you're somewhat educated. I said, but I don't care if you pick underwater basket weaving as your major and they offer it, and that's your passion, go for it. I said, good luck finding a job, but go for it. But you've got to seek your passion. And this is what I tell kids. I said, look, really, I mean, and I don't know is not an answer. That's not an acceptable answer. You really have to go sit atop a hillside and meditate and find out, where do you see yourself 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 20 years from now? And then once you sort of visualize it, then start creating that path, by understanding where you're at now. Yeah. And draw yourself a path, because you have to know the way. And this is why I say you have to follow your passion, because the path is about 90% of your life it's getting there, and you've got to enjoy the path. If you don't enjoy the path, you've got the wrong goals in front of you. And so that's what I said. Find your passion, and you're going to enjoy the path of getting there.
Yeah, that's
don't be afraid to dream big as well. Don't be afraid to dream big. That's the last thing.
Absolutely. I mean, great advice. Thank you, Jose. Yeah, John, what would you say? to those young folks?
I got asked yesterday. I grew up in Colorado Springs, and the guy said, "Yeah, the Air Force on one side of town and Army on the other. How'd you join the Navy?" Well, see, I met somebody in the Navy, and so what I'd like to say is that I didn't necessarily know what I wanted to do post college, and I'll take a step back. I didn't know what I wanted to do when I entered college to begin with. I went to college because my parents told me I had to, and it was left up to me to figure out what it was. And trials and tribulations. I got get booted out, but I came back with a motivation to learn something. I tell people, if there's something you want to do, find somebody doing it. Go talk to that person that you may think that's something you want to do, and find out from them. Find a mentor, find somebody in your life that you admire, that you wonder how they got where they went. And in my case, there were two guys. One guy convinced me to go back to school when I was a surveyor, to not accept making $4 an hour and being the lowest person on the rung of the ladder. And the other was a guy that I tutored in calculus when I was a senior in college, who had flown Dauntless dive bombers in World War II, and he taught me about the Navy. And so I might not have gone down that path if I didn't have that opportunity. If somebody didn't take a time in their life to make a difference in the life of a child. We all have that ability, as we get on the second half of our lives, you can fundamentally change the life of somebody, and you may not realize how minor that experience might be. And it does make a difference. I tell the story a lot about being in Phoenix in an elevator at an ASIS conference, American Indian Science and Engineering Society. And this young lady steps up to me and she said, "You're John Harrington." I'm like, "That does not happen to me." Okay. That happens to other people. It doesn't happen to me. And she said, "I met you when I was 12 years old at a summer camp in Fort Lewis College, Navajo summer camp."
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And she said, I said, "Yeah, I remember that. You had to run around a mile on the track before the day started." She goes, "Yeah." She said, "I didn't realize I could be an engineer until I met you." And she says, "I want to thank you. I'm a civil engineer at the city of San Francisco. And I want to thank you for, making that opportunity." And I didn't set out to do that, but somebody will see what you're doing. And if they admire what you're doing, or if there's something about it that catches their interest, they may go down that path. So, we've all sat in class. It's hard. We take tests. We have to go through the process, and it can be difficult, but there's a light at the end of the tunnel, and it's not a train, unless, you're on a train. But, you want to, go down there because you never know what's going to happen. And you may surprise yourself one day that those people that popped up in your life at some point in time fundamentally changed your life. And we should all have that experience. So.
Well, gentlemen, we could talk for hours, and, maybe this will be the first of some other conversations we can have, but I just have to express my gratitude for the gift of sharing this time with both of you, Jose and John. And you're the embodiment, I think, of when I talked to Robin Wall Kimmerer about her book, Braiding Sweetgrass. We started the Indigenuity program on Thursday with an interview I did with her. And I said, your book reminded me of three things. That the universe is basically full of gifts. None of us fill out a credit application before we come into this world. The land, the air, the water, the life around us, it's gifts. And that gives us that sense of gratitude. And you have embodied the third one, generosity. You've been so generous with your time, with your knowledge, with your wisdom. So I just say, Sanle Gadaswa. Thank you so much, gentlemen. And until next time, okay?
Okay. Thanks, Daniel.
Thank you very much. Good seeing you again, man.
Nice
okay. Okay.